put the discussion on the road now about malaria. Of course, we already gave you heads up earlier that today is World Malaria Day. I'm joined by two doctors, Dr. Alex Oko, consultant family health physician, public health physician. Thank you for coming on the program. We appreciate it. Yes, and I'm also joined by a colleague of his. By the way, Dr. Oko is from the Central Hospital here in Benin, and then I'm joined by his colleague from the University of Benin Teaching Hospital as well, Dr. Ndobisi Mokogu is the Community Health Department, UBTH. Thank you for coming as well. We appreciate that. Dr. Oko, let me begin with you. The last time you were here, we did not specifically talk about malaria, even though we had to play around issues on health and the sector itself. In 2016, for instance, we were told that we recorded about 216 million cases of malaria, with about 450 deaths recorded on account of malaria. Whether those figures are correct or not may be one argument, but the fact that malaria poses a significant threat is more of a timely conversation for us. The question is, between 2016 and now, you have a 3-year period, obviously. Have we recorded success in the fight against malaria?
Thank you for the question. Thank you for bringing this program.
Pleasure.
Yes. I will say we have made some progress, but not significantly.
Okay.
Sad enough, we ought to have made some reasonable improvements in the statistics. At least. But as you were, from 2015 to date, about 4 years down the line, we've been detecting between almost near zero progress.
Wow.
The figures have remained dismally poor. In terms of progression, we've not really advanced the push against malaria scourge. So the control has been worthwhile, but we still need to do more to record more significant progress. But those figures I had those days, down the 2015, 2016, they are still about the same as at 2017, 2018.
Right.
The incidence rates have revolved around that same figure. So we've not really been able to push it that much. So the import of that is that much more needs to be done as far as the campaign, the control, and all the preventive parameters are concerned.
Incidentally, you just mentioned 2018 now, in passing, and last year the Director General of the World Health Organization had talked about how that we all should be ready to beat malaria. But that's 1 year behind us now. Some persons say a lot of times it's just the usual rhetorics. But do we actually see real-time, measurable, specific actions following such rhetorics?
Well, you could be doing something if the outcome is not there to show.
Yeah.
That means you have not done anything. For the fact that we've not really been able to churn out good statistical parameters to show that the control measures are using results and things like that, that does not mean that there have been absolute inaction.
Okay.
A lot have been going on. We know policy statements that are related. We know implementation strategies that are being carried out, both at the federal, state, and even at the local level. Activities are going on. For the fact that we've not recorded significant push in the country, it means that whatever we're doing needs to be revved up.
Right.
So I think it's a clarion call for all stakeholders, for all hands to be on deck to see how we can change the pattern and maybe up our games again. Yes, things have been happening actually.
Dr. Ndobisi, let me talk to you a bit about this malaria issue. It will appear a lot of us take malaria for granted. People almost literally have their hearts hanging in between their lips when they hear things like HIV, tuberculosis, cancer of any kind. But why are we a bit lackadaisical about malaria?
Well, thank you for the question. And I think one reason why there is so much inaction regarding malaria is that it's been with us for a very long time.
Okay.
So it has become, let me use the word, part and parcel of us, especially in this part of the world, endemic countries. And because of that, it seems as if it's something that has been your everyday.
So there's that familiarity factor.
Yeah, so it's something that we need to change because, like my colleague said, a lot of harm is being done by malaria on a daily basis.
Whether we know it or not.
Whether we know it or not. So it's something that we need to put on the front burner, and that's why this year WHO will be asking us to have this campaign, Zero Malaria, starts with me,
Right.
bringing the message back home.
Each of us should take responsibility.
Yes, that's just the idea. Because many a times we look at malaria and the control of malaria as something being done from foreign countries or donor agencies, but we have a lot in terms of control that we need to do. So it's something that we need to, as governments, as NGOs, as media outlets, we need to put this on the front burner, this message on the front burner that malaria is doing a lot of harm. And we have a lot to do.
Let's talk about this harm and, in particular, preventive measures. For some years now, at least in this part of the world, distribution of insecticide-treated nets has been on. At some point, it even became political. We heard of instances where people were getting 3, 4, 5 instead of 1, for example. That aside, is distribution of insecticide-treated nets enough measure in terms of prevention?
It's one of the key preventive measures.
Okay.
Because when you talk about prevention, you talk about vector control, and the use of insecticide-treated nets falls under vector control. But other measures in terms of controlling the vector, and when we talk about the vector, we talk about the agent that carries the malaria parasites, and that's your mosquito,
right.
Anopheles mosquito. So the use of insecticide-treated nets is just one aspect of the control. We also have things like use of indoor residual spraying, which, well, in this part of the world is not very common. Then things like use of what we call chemoprophylaxis, treatment of persons who are vulnerable to the effects of malaria, like pregnant women, like children under 5. So it's a whole package, but focusing on just one aspect may not give you the intended outcome in terms of controlling malaria. So, and that is why we need to step up our game, like Dr. Oko said, that in terms of control, a lot more needs to be done. We need to devote more resources. We need to also find out, even these nets that are being distributed, are they being used? Because one of the key aspects of the goals of WHO Global Technical Strategy is that we need more information on products that have been distributed. How many persons got these nets and how many persons are actually using these nets? So based on that, those statistics would help you know if you need to do more in terms of advocacy, in terms of distribution, in terms of even devoting more resources to purchase more commodities. So a lot still needs to be done.
We'll talk about all of these, especially looking at policies in particular, because Dr. Oko already made an allusion to policies and so on and so forth. Of course, Nigeria is a country that has, sadly, a history of policy somersault and so on and so forth. But I'm not going to ask you to be a judge in your own cause because you work for the government. But I want us to talk about the particular damage that malaria does. You know, when people tell you things like, my body is hot, my mouth is bitter, and so on and so forth, is that where it ends? Because a lot of doctors have talked about how that malaria at some points would attack the liver. That sounds quite risky.
Yes, thank you for coming to this angle. At this point, it's pertinent to establish a very fundamental background.
Okay.
Yes, let's appreciate the fact that malaria is not just a symptom. It's not just a simple disease of an organ. It's a systemic problem. It's a disease that attacks the vital tissue, the vital cell in the blood. And the blood is not localized in any part of the body. It's the main mechanism of circulation. That means there is no part of your body that the blood does not get to. And malaria dwells inside the blood. So that means every part of your body is invaded, is affected. Is damaged or demolished by the parasite once it's gained entrance. But the good thing is that it is not all parasitemia, all parasites in the blood that transmit to malaria fever. Because there's a threshold, and the threshold varies from person to person. It depends on your immunity. It depends on your state of your premorbid condition, your state of health before the parasites invade you. And it also depends on your age. It depends on other factors around you. That is why we talk about the vulnerable group. The vulnerable group are those that are susceptible, those that their immunity has been brought down for one reason or the other. For instance, children, by virtue of their age, they are still developing their immunity. Their immune system is not yet mature So they fall victim very easily. Pregnant women, before pregnancy, the woman is optimum in immunity. When pregnancy comes, the immunity crashes. So a parasite that was dwelling in the woman when she was not pregnant and she hadn't malaria fever, once pregnancy comes, the immunity crashes, fever fulminates, and malaria, she's done with malaria. The same thing with non-immune persons that might have migrated from, maybe temperate region, non-endemic regions, parts of the world, and they come in, they don't have the immunity. Any single parasite that gets into them will lead to fulminant malaria. And how does this happen? The parasites get injected into the body and it goes straight to the blood by what injects is the vector we talked about.
Right.
Not just the Anopheles mosquito, but the female Anopheles mosquito, which was discovered many years ago, far back as 1897 by Ronald Ross. All that history. So when that parasite gets into the red blood cell, what happens at that stage is called asexual multiplication. They just multiply without fusion of the gametes. They multiply on their own. Spores are formed, and it's very prolific at that point. Millions, thousands, and millions can be formed within a very short time. And the red cell that invades is damaged completely. So imagine thousands of parasites damaging thousands of red blood cells. So that means the blood capacity, the blood quality of that individual will drop. That we call anemia. Weakness will emerge. You are unable to do what you usually do, lethargy and all that. And that process of proliferating, the parasite release a lot of toxins, waste materials, metabolic products, and those materials are nauseous, are lethal to the body. So those are the toxins, that the body reacts to. And that reaction of the body by way of inflammation or general systemic response leads to fever because activities are hyped up in the body. So there's a rise in temperature. That rise in temperature is the fever.
Okay.
That you see notably in malaria. And because of what is happening generally in the body, it also gets to the head, and the way the head will respond is to have an ache. So there's headache.
Yes.
So, and the body's functionality has dropped. There's loss of appetite because the bowels are no longer moving as they used to be. And, there's systemic breakdown. And all those breakdown red blood cells, need to be passed out. You pass them out in urine. Urine will change color because the red cells are being passed out, the hems, the hemoglobin, that are damaged are being passed out.
Right.
And the urine becomes darkish. So these are symptoms that the person may manifest. And at that point, the person is unable to do what he usually do. And there's loss of school hour if he's a student.
Yes.
Cannot study. If he's a worker, there's a lot of man hour. You cannot go to work. And your family role as an individual, whether as a parent or as a child or as a mother, is lost. So cumulatively, there is a lot of economic loss at the national level, at the community level, and even at the family level. So there is the loss due to the problem, the disease of malaria, is almost inquantifiable. Because if you just look at the money spent in procuring drugs and all that, it is an insignificant part of it. During that time you are down, what you would have done, you are not doing it.
On account of ill health.
On account of ill health. So the opportunity cost of treating malaria, of taking care of malaria, is so monumental. Sometimes when people try to put a figure to it, it's just a factor. It's a tip of the iceberg. That is why the clarion call, the awareness for people to embrace the control, can't be too much, can't be overemphasized. And in a particular environment, we all know that statistically and surveys and studies have also shown that there's a strong linkage between poverty and malaria endemicity. And we cannot but call on every stakeholder, whether political, traditional, and professionals, otherwise, even artisans, to embrace this, because as far as eliminating poverty and ignorance is concerned, all hands must be on deck.
Right. There are issues we must look at here, going by this narrative you just established. When people get to that point where the symptoms are playing out,
yes,
one or two things is likely going to happen.
Yes.
Either to attribute this ill health to some supernatural phenomena, or to just go over the counter and buy medication, whatever it's called, anti-malaria.
Yes.
How do we also deal with that? Because experts like yourself will say that's tantamount to drug abuse or
Yes.
self-medication.
Self-medication
Yes.
is not an obvious no-no,
Okay.
but there is a high limitation that's placed on it.
Okay.
That's why sometimes when you say you have a slight headache, they tell you if you take 1 or 2 medications after
doesn't-
2 days and it doesn't
See your
respond,
doctor.
make sure you do something.
a doctor.
See a doctor and go to the clinic. So we must know where to draw the line. And these days, people misconstrue fevers. We know that the commonest cause of fever in our environment because of the
malaria.
density of malaria is malaria fever. Is malaria.
Yeah.
But that does not mean that every fever
Is
related to
malaria.
malaria. And for reasons of wrong diagnosis and wrong treatment, people give a lot of falsehood to typhoid fever. You understand?
Who's to blame for that? The patients, the lab people?
Ignorance is the blame. Ignorance, whoever ignorance evades, ignorance knows no bounds. It can evade, a professional, it can evade, an ordinary man. Once you give room to ignorance, a lot of things can happen.
Okay.
So
I asked that question because you mentioned the wrong diagnosis, and that's significant.
Yes, and that is where a lot of things need to be put in place. Now, for a proper diagnosis to be established, one, the person needs to present himself to the proper place.
Okay.
Clinical examination needs to be taken. And it's a clinician that can do clinical examination. So if you present yourself to a non-clinician, maybe you go to the chemist, you go to the laboratory, that thorough clinical examination will be missed out.
Okay.
And a lot can be picked up from there. That is where you determine the kind of test you even need to do.
Oh.
If you need to do one.
Because I know what usually happens
Yes.
is there's an order where the person feels the basic symptoms of malaria,
Yes.
and then they head straight to the lab first.
Yes.
So they take the result of the lab
To the doctor.
to a chemist.
Yes. And when you get to the lab, you tell the person, I have this fever, you just run tests for malaria, for typhoid, and say, okay, this is you got to take treatment. But that means on your own, you have narrowed down your fever to just malaria and typhoid. It could be some other things. You understand? We know that mosquito transmits malaria fever, but it's not only malaria fever that mosquito transmits. There's dengue fever, there's chikungunya, there's yellow fever. How are you sure that mosquito that beating you is just malaria it has given you? So that is why you must see a clinician
First.
first. You understand? So positive health-seeking behavior must be emphasized. That is one. And after seeing a clinician, then the onus is now on the clinician to do the proper diagnosis and do the proper prescription. Once he leaves the court of the physician, the next thing he goes to the pharmacy unit. The dispensing. It has to be thorough and proper and accurate. And if the pharmacist does his own bit, how is he sure that the manufacturer of the drug has also done his or her own bit? If you say a drug contains 20 milligrams of a drug or 120 milligrams of a drug, how are we sure that that tablet actually contains that milligram?
How do we actually determine that?
That's where the regulatory agencies come in. You can see it's multi.
It's a chain now.
Yeah, it's a chain. That's what I want us to bear in mind. This zero malaria starts with me. That me is everybody, not just the patient, not just the clinician, even the policy makers, the regulators. Whether you call it NAFDAC, whether you call it SON, whether you call it pharmaceutical council or whatever, or medical council, everybody is involved. So that the person taking that drug for malaria should be sure that that drug contains what it's meant to contain. The prescription you have been given, let's be sure that it will work because it has to go through the normal cycle. Because it's a microbial infection.
Right.
Yeah, and those parasites are very sensitive. Very sensitive. They are living things. Let's bear that in mind from biology. So they have sensibilities. So if you bring a noxious agent to them in the bloodstream and it's not enough, it's not to the threshold
Right.
to knock them off, it only weakens them temporarily. And by the time they rise up, they have gained up strength against that agent. So that if that agent comes the second time, they may overwhelm it. It will not be the other way around. So that is what we now term drug resistance, which has landed us to where we are now as far as malaria control is concerned. You know where we started from chloroquine
Right.
before we got to ACT.
When people used to be feeling itching.
Yes. At the time, we discovered that chloroquine was no longer doing it. We started combining,
Sulfadoxine,
sulfadoxine, pyrimethamine, which I don't want to mention trade name here.
Of course.
And combining it with other agents, to see whether we can overcome the issue of chloroquine resistance. before we now go to artemether combination therapy. ACT is where we are now. So you see where drug resistance have landed us. And these are the things that are fundamental to it.
Right.
So if these factors are not eliminated, where we are now may not be the end of
So
the
are we
journey.
stuck with ACT?
Well, we can't say that yet. Surveys are still
Going on.
even as we speak,
Okay.
to see the efficacy, the efficiency, and effectiveness of ACTs, over the years, to know whether we need to continue this path or there will need to be another paradigm shift from where we are now. And the behavior of you and I
Yes.
towards health seeking, compliance to medications, and our regulators and drug manufacturers doing their own bits, meeting up to standard, will determine whether ACT will be the last bus stop or not.
Excellent. I'm going to allow Dr. Ndubisi at his voice. He just talked about us each taking responsibility.
Yes.
We've had many cases, many more than we can count, where patients have been given medication for malaria in particular. And then the first day, the second day, they feel good, they abandon, they discontinue the medication. That poses a lot of danger too, doesn't it?
You are spot on, because at that level, you find that there's still some level of what we call parasitemia.
Okay.
And even though it may have been knocked off, if it still exists in the blood, then it still has the ability to cause damage. And that is why, in terms of adherence, like my colleague said, there needs to be education. The patients need to know that even though you have taken your medication for 2 days and you feel better, that is not the end of the story.
Right.
So it goes even beyond even completing your medication and prevention, sleeping under mosquito nets, long-lasting insecticide-treated nets, making sure that in terms of preventing the infection, you yourself as an individual knows what to do. So it's a whole lot, and I think this campaign for this year 2019 is apt to understand that the fight against malaria begins not just with somebody out there or somebody in the hospital or somebody in the Ministry of Health, but it starts with you.
I want to talk to you about policy quickly. Do we have malaria-specific policies in this country? I know we have overall health policy, but do we have malaria-focused policy? Because we understand policies drive a lot of these initiatives.
There are a lot of policies, and in fact, in the Federal Ministry of Health, there is a unit that is domiciled in the Federal Ministry of Health that seeks to control malaria in the entire country.
Oh.
National Malaria Elimination Program unit. So their duties are to make sure that everything concerning malaria in the entire country is dealt with. So when you talk about policies, every now and then, in fact, what happens is that every now and then, WHO releases a policy, and it's domiciled right in the country through the control program to make sure that these policies actually get to ground and they are workable on the ground, both at the local levels, at the state levels, and at the national level. So when it comes to policies, a lot of policies are on ground to make sure that our country as a whole fights and controls malaria. So it goes beyond just having new policies. In fact, at present, WHO has a strategy to make sure that in the next 15 years, we are starting from 2016 to 2030, that malaria is controlled.
Is that part of the SDGs?
Yeah, it was post-MDGs, so yes, in a way, following the SDGs. So from 2016 to 2030. And part of that strategy says that from 2016 to 2030, we want to make sure that we have 90% reduction in the number of malaria cases worldwide. Also, it says that we want to make sure that from 2016 to 2030, that you have a 90% reduction in malaria-related deaths worldwide.
Oh, that sounds beautiful, at least theoretically.
It sounds, yes. So,
but there's something I wanted to address quickly. Dr. Oko talked about how that there's a correlation now between malaria and poverty.
Yes.
How do we address both side by side, or as people, they will say in Latin, pari passu? How do we do that?
Well, I think in that chain, if you add education, it becomes a full chain. So poverty, disease, and education. So once education comes in, then it's, in a way, you can help to control the other parts of the chain. For example, when you're educated, it helps your economic status. When you're educated, you know what to do. For example, when a case of malaria comes, you know where to go, like he said. You know where to present yourself, not just going to maybe a roadside chemist to tell him that these are the symptoms I have, and he gives you a gamut of medication and tells you take this. So we find that education is so key. And when we talk about education, it may not just be only formal education in the classroom. Enlightenment, like what we are doing this morning, becomes very key in making sure that the entire community knows what to do and they know where to seek care from. And that's why he talked about having a positive health seeking behavior. You understand that?
Something all of us need.
All of us need. Whether you're a professor, whether you're an artisan, whether you're a market woman, you need to understand that concept, that this is the concept of health seeking behavior, and this is what I should do when I have an issue, I have a problem.
Let's talk about funding too, Dr. Oko. I think that's also a very important strand in this conversation. But because in that 2016 I made reference to a while ago, we are told, according to the UN, to the WHO in particular, that at least $217 billion was the amount of funding, the volume of funding that was allocated to malaria-specific initiatives across the world. One would have thought that's a whole lot of money, maybe more than enough to address all of these malaria issues. We also understand, for example, how people like Bill Gates have gone across Africa to support polio, malaria, and a few other health-related initiatives. Do we still have funding gap?
Yes, we do. We do. You know, today we talk about malaria awareness, malaria campaign.
Right.
You know, the three-pronged fundamental issues that could drive this today as we speak is raising political awareness, political will. That is bottom line to resource mobilization. You know, resource mobilization is not just from donors, from NGOs, from government alone, you know, from individuals as well. You know, and there is no way government alone can drive this issue. You know, no matter how committed that government is, even if you push all your budgetary allocation for defense, education, agriculture, everything to health, you still may not get there. So the mobilization starts from getting all hands on deck. And also, let's also realize that if we don't, the third part of it is empowering the community. That is where when you combine these three, that's when you can fight that poverty very well. If you empower the community, empower the family, you know, let the woman in the house be empowered as well, not just only the man, so that the household economy will improve, and that will be a way of fighting, you know, some of the bane of malaria control. And we know very well that the part that government will have to play will be to provide basic infrastructure, because you can't talk of hygiene without talking about water supply.
Sure.
Yeah. If there is no good water supply, you know, then hygiene is zero. And government has a big role to play to make sure that there's good water supply. If the infrastructure is broken down, the roads are not there, you know, the facilities are not there, you know, the power supply is poor, you know, malaria control will continue to be difficult. Because even in the indoor, you need good ventilation to put those insects and vectors away. So if there is no, you can't power your fan, you can't even use electricity, the whole place is humid, you know, you enable the vector to thrive, and malaria transmission will be enhanced. So there is a great role to the government can play to reduce, you know, poverty even at the family level.
Yeah.
Resource mobilization is just a bit of it. Stakeholders, you know, philanthropists, this is where to put your money, you know, and it will make huge impact to lives. Because, like you rightly know, every minute as we speak, somebody somewhere is dying of malaria.
Wow.
You know, either a child, a pregnant woman, an elderly person, somebody somewhere is dying of malaria. So if we can, that is why the United States President's initiative has done so much on this, you know, the Gates Foundation. A lot of foreign donors have realized this and they put their money there. So in-house, as a charity,
it begins at home.
In-house, we can still get some philanthropists around us to put money into malaria control. You don't need to give that money to anybody. You know what to do. You know, like for instance, the state government have done so much. They have tried. This insecticide treated nets that was gotten, a lot of money was spent in distributing it. But the question now is, how effective was the use? Because you could have it,
Yes.
you don't know how to use it, you don't know when to use it, you don't even know the importance of using it. Then it becomes a mere household material, just lying there and not being properly used. So we have to bridge that gap. You know, where the government has stopped, we have to continue from there to make sure that the whole objective of control is realized. Yes.
Okay, Dr. Ndubisi, I was going to ask you something about those in the rural areas in particular, because when people live in the city, it will appear their level of exposure, awareness, enlightenment about things like this, it's a bit, it's much higher compared to those who live in the rural areas. Those are people who assume a lot, and assumption can be very dangerous when it comes to health. You have to be sure it is what it is. It is either A or it's B, but most times people assume. People are likely going to tell you things like, I feel this way because I've had a hectic week. I've been going to the farm the whole week and so on and so forth. How do we deal with that assumption so that people can seek help fast enough? Most times, one of the issues that people deal with in this country, as far as health is concerned, generally is it would have gotten to a point where so much of damage has been done before run to the doctor. So how do we deal with that?
Well, it can be dealt in several ways, but I think one of the things that we need to know is that once you have standard health facilities, whether in the urban or rural areas, then it becomes easy to deal with. Because you can't tell somebody have good health seeking behavior and he needs to travel 1 hour to get to the nearest hospital.
Right.
It becomes difficult for him to do something about it. And that is where the assumption comes into play, and he does what he feels or what she feels may be good enough to deal with the problem. So first things first, you have health facilities, health centers in those rural areas. And I know that the Edo State government is doing a lot in terms of providing or upgrading health facilities at rural level to make sure that our brothers and sisters in rural areas have access to high quality healthcare. So once these health facilities or health centers are available locally or at the rural level, then it becomes easy for you to advocate, for you to mobilize the community to tell them that when you have this problem, please, as much as possible, seek or go to your health facility, see your health provider, or go to the nearest hospital close to you. Because when you ask somebody to do something or have seek a particular solution and you're not providing that solution for that person, then he does what he feels within his own means, deals with the problem. And it also takes us to the fact that healthcare is very expensive.
Oh, that's a reality we have to deal with.
It's very expensive. Very expensive. So it's, in fact, one of the problems that WHO is trying to address now is access to health, universal health coverage. So it's very possible that you have a health facility within your locality, but in terms of access, financial access, you cannot access that facility because you will need to pay to access the facility. And that is why universal health coverage, which is being championed by the World Health Organization now, is key. And one aspect of universal health coverage is use of health insurance that makes sure that those who are covered by this health insurance have access to high quality care at very reduced cost. So in that way, you find that whether you are in the city or in the rural area, you can access healthcare or health facilities and get the needed care or needed attention you need. So it's key to, the key in all this is that the basic things or basic infrastructure, like he said, needs to be available.
Right. People must have access
to it, which is very key.
There's something key too in this narrative you just pushed, which is the health insurance and coverage. Dr. Oko, you were here in December when we were talking about universal health coverage. You made a whole lot of salient points on that front. When you look at the US, for example, during electioneering, when politicians are campaigning and having their rallies, one of the key points they keep hammering on is health before they start talking about things like education and taxes and so on and so forth. What's your assessment of our health insurance in this country?
Bearing in mind that health is at the center of development.
Right.
Because you can't talk of development when you don't have a healthy citizen. So we know that it's not it's not the number, it's not just the people, the quality of health of individuals that matters, but when you look at the collective, picture, what proportion of your entire population
is healthy.
Not just that one or two people are very healthy, while the mammoth crowd are, indulgent in terms of health. So looking at that overall picture, that is where the concept of universality comes in, health coverage. And if you must carry everybody along, you must find a meeting point to bridge the very high and the very low. I know that in our society, those that are down the ladder are more.
Right.
So it's a kind of a pyramid. When you go to the top, the very rich ones that are able to afford first-class treatment
in any part of the world,
they are very scanty. While the majority, almost the entire population, are dying in ignorance and poverty, and disease down the ladder. So the challenge for us, as a developing country, especially with our peculiar problems, is to bridge that gap. Bring those that are up there down a bit, and bring those that are down there up a bit, so that everybody will be close ranked and be able to afford what is there for us for health. And that's where insurance comes in. The insurance pools resources and shares the risk. So if you want to pool resources, that means you have to develop a way whereby you take from those that have, put it there, so that those that don't have can benefit from it. And it's not an easy thing to formulate that kind of policy, develop that system. Those countries you mentioned, they started donkey years ago to get to where they are now.
But why are we not starting at all?
So we are already starting. That's what I want to tell you.
Okay.
We are already starting. And by the grace of God, now that we have started, no going back. Only a couple of days ago, if you can recall, I know you're always in the news, if you can recall, the upper house at the national level, the Senate, passed the health insurance bill into law. That is a very bold statement. And even down here at home in Edo State, we know that our own state House of Assembly has also passed the Edo State health insurance into law as well.
Those are steps in the right direction.
Yes, very good steps. So that is to tell you that there is indeed light at the end of the tunnel. So I can tell you that in no distant time, the issue of universal health coverage, especially even in Edo State, will not just be a mirage, will not just be a rhetoric that has been spoken about, but a reality. Because even as we speak, health facilities, especially at the primary care level, statewide, are being revamped and upgraded. So the issue of accessibility is also being addressed at that level.
I like the fact
all this will point down to proper malaria control.
Good. I like the fact that yourself and Dr. Ndubisi here have taken out time to talk about infrastructure, which is also key and foundational to answering some of these questions that we are asking on the program this morning. But at the risk of dragging you into politics, which is something I don't want to do. Yes, just recently, just a few days ago, Dr. Chris Ngige, himself a medical doctor, said that doctors who aspire to go abroad can. They have the right to, of course, the man is right. They have the right to, they can do that. If they want to go abroad to practice, for whatever reason, they can go abroad. But he also says that we have enough doctors. In fact, he says we have more than enough doctors in Nigeria to cater to patients, to deal with issues of health and so on and so forth. Now, my business is not to talk about the Honorable Minister of Labor and Productivity or employment. My concern is, are we not dealing with shortage of manpower as far as the medical community in this country is concerned? Because people are now looking at the ratio of patients to doctors or doctors to patients, whichever it is. What's your take on that?
Yeah, definitely, I agree that we're dealing with shortage. My dear colleague and very senior colleague, the Honorable Minister of Labor and Employment, has spoken a personal opinion, but for which he is completely entitled to, which has generated reactions in different spheres. We don't want to join issues with all that.
Of course.
So his opinion has been spoken, but my own opinion, which I'm also entitled to, is to say that the contrary is what I uphold, that we are in shortfall of even the World Health Organization standard of the proportion of medical practitioners and the population. We have not reached it. So therefore, we can't be in excess. So if we have not reached it, it's one thing to have the number, it's another thing to have the quality
Okay.
So the ones you have now, that is even not enough. How much is the state, when I say the state now, the nation, the Nigeria state, doing, to improve the quality of their healthcare practitioners?
In any case, what should be the ratio? I mean, going by WHO standard.
Going by WHO standard, in a population of like 200 million people on estimate for Nigeria, and we hear from MDCN records, we just have about 40,000 doctors. And if you work that out arithmetically, we are talking about 200,000 to 40,000, 200 million.
About one doctor to maybe 200,000.
200,000 to about 40 doctors. That's what it is. That's like 20,000 to about 4 doctors. 50,000 to about a single doctor.
Which is
that's overwhelming.
Overwhelming. Yes. So you can see that it's a far cry. It's a far cry. So it should be in the unit level, in the hundreds. You understand? Not 50,000 to one person, in the hundreds. So that means if you multiply the number of doctors now by 10, we may still need more.
And you find out that it's
Dr. Ndubisi, you want to add to that?
You find out with our current statistics, you find that even the healthcare practitioners on ground are overworked.
Okay.
Yes.
And it affects the quality of the output.
Yes.
Because they're easily burnt out.
Exactly.
So it's a no-brainer to know that what we have on ground now needs to be increased. And like he said, apart from what we have on ground now, how much in terms of training and retraining are you giving them? Not just doctors, every cadre of health workers.
Yeah.
So it's something that I feel the government needs to put in more effort. It's something that beyond the political aspect, what on ground, what the picture on ground shows that much more needs to be done in terms of health workforce and health manpower.
Okay, just your last word, Dr. Oko, before we're done.
Yes. Let me also emphasize here that the burden of malaria being huge in our system today is placing a lot of burden on the health system. So we need a strong health system to cope with the huge burden of malaria. And recently you see the news is all over the place that there is poor funding for health, even at the tertiary level. The teaching hospitals are crying that the federal government is not funding enough. We just talked about manpower problem. If the manpower is weak and the facilities are not there, which of the hospitals in Nigeria will you go to now? You talk of cutting-edge technology in healthcare. It's a far cry. So we need to strengthen the health system to be able to withstand this huge burden of malaria scourge, so that at the end of the day, the control will be effective. Because you know that prevention is a whole gamut.
Right.
Yeah, it's not just to prevent the parasite from coming into the individual, but when the parasite do come, how does the person access effective care so that it does not transmit to another person?
Yeah.
So that is where we need a very fundamentally strong health system.
We hope in the days, weeks, months, and years ahead, governments and all other stakeholders will put their hands on deck to ensure that we strengthen the health sector, and then we scale up where necessary as quickly as possible, because whatever it is that we're doing as a population, as a government, revolves around health. So we've got to get that right. So every other thing over time, one way or another, will fall. I'd love to thank especially Dr. Alex Oko, consultant, public health physician. We thank you for coming. We appreciate it. I also want to thank especially Dr. Ndubisi Mokogo. I'm very careful with your last name. Is from the University of Benin Teaching Hospital. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming. We appreciate your expertise and all of these enlightenment efforts you've made on the program. We hope you enjoy the rest of your day.